Hello, and welcome to your first lecture, where we will explore the phenomenon of leadership. This week, we're diving into the big question: what is leadership, really? By the end of this week's lectures and activities, you should be able to 1. Understand the key differences between leadership and management. They're often used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. 2. Start developing an understanding of leadership as a phenomenon. Where does it happen? Why does it matter? And how do we experience it in everyday life? 3. And finally, we'll begin exploring how we can actually define leadership, which, as you'll see, is more complex than it sounds. So whether you're thinking about CEOs, activists, coaches, or even fictional characters, we'll be unpacking what makes someone a leader and why that matters. Before we go any further, let's clear something up that often causes confusion. What's the difference between leadership and management? According to Kotter 1990, management is all about dealing with complexity. Managers bring structure, they keep things running smoothly, and they make sure systems and processes are consistent and reliable. But leadership? That's something else entirely. Kotter also says leadership is about navigating change, especially in a fast-moving, unpredictable world. So, while managers might focus on maintaining the status quo, leaders are looking ahead, setting direction, adjusting course, and inspiring others to follow. Amanchukwu and colleagues 2015 put it nicely. A good leader motivates, inspires, and guides others towards shared or organizational goals. So it's not just about telling people what to do. It's about painting a picture of where you're going and giving people a reason to want to get there. In fact, Dupree, 1990, goes even further. He says the most important job of a leader is to define reality, to help others see clearly what's happening and what needs to change. So, if you remember one thing, managers handle the known. Leaders step into the unknown and bring others with. Let's be honest. Leadership is one of those terms we think we understand until we try to define it. As you can see here, scholars have long struggled to agree on a single universal definition. In fact, leadership theories are often plagued by the absence of a clear consensus, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It reflects just how complex, flexible, and context-specific leadership really is. Bass, 1990, reminds us that leadership is a universal phenomenon. It shows up in all organized human groups, in communities, religious institutions, the military, businesses, even nations. It's everywhere. But it doesn't always look the same. That's why we have so many competing theories, from trait-based models to transformational, servant, and distributed leadership, each trying to make sense of something that's inherently human and deeply social. So rather than chasing one perfect definition, our goal is to understand leadership as a dynamic concept shaped by culture, context, and purpose. Here's something you might find surprising, or maybe not. There's still no single precise definition of the term leadership. In fact, there are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are people who've tried to define it. Just take a look at the sheer volume of books, articles, and studies on leadership. It's massive. And that's because scholars have approached it from all kinds of angles, each using different theories, lenses, and assumptions that made sense to them. It's no wonder then that the concept remains complex and contested, even though leadership is something we see in nearly every human group, from businesses and schools to armies and activist movements. Alvesen and Svenningsson 2003 go a step further. They actually suggest that trying to come up with a universally accepted definition might do more harm than good, because it could limit creativity and shut down new ways of thinking about what leadership really is or could be. So instead of chasing one fixed answer, maybe the better question is, what does leadership mean in this context, and why does it matter? So if there's no single definition of leadership, what are some of the ways scholars have tried to explain it? Let's take a look at a few widely cited definitions that give us a sense of the common ground and some of the differences. First, Lucier and Achua, 2001, describe leadership as the influencing process of leaders and followers to achieve organizational objectives through change. This definition highlights two key things: influence and change. Leadership here is something that moves people and organizations toward a new direction. Next, Nordhaus 2010 keeps it simple but powerful. He says, leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Notice again, it's about influence, but also about working with others, not over them, to move towards something shared. And then we have Uckel 2010, who offers a bit more depth. Leadership is the process of influencing others to understand and agree about what needs to be done and how to do it, and a process of facilitating individual and collective efforts to accomplish shared objectives. So Uckel takes us beyond just influence. He includes understanding, agreement, and the actual work of making things happen. Put together, these definitions show us that while leadership may be hard to pin down, it consistently revolves around influence, collaboration, purpose, and change. Let's continue exploring how leadership is defined by different scholars and how those definitions have shifted over time. First, we have Richards and Engel, 1986. They say, leadership is about articulating visions, embodying values, and creating the environment within which things can be accomplished. So here, leadership isn't just about giving direction, it's about vision, values, and culture. It's about creating a space where others can succeed. Now contrast that with an earlier definition from Katz and Kahn, 1978, who describe leadership as the influential increment over and above mechanical compliance with the routine directives of the organization. In other words, real leadership goes beyond just following orders or checking boxes. It's about the extra influence a person brings that inspires people to go further, think bigger, and engage more deeply. Now, what do both of these perspectives have in common? They both emphasize influence. And that's something we see again and again. In modern and classic definitions alike, influence is the thread that runs through almost all of them. So how has our understanding evolved? Well, early views often focused on leadership as a set of traits or behaviours, what kind of person a leader is, or what a leader does. But more recent thinking sees leadership as a relational process of influence, something that happens between people rather than just from When we think about where our ideas of leadership come from, we often point to obvious sources: governments, workplaces, schools, maybe even family. But the truth is, our perspectives on leadership are shaped long before we ever enter a boardroom or cast a vote. One of the biggest influences? Popular culture. From childhood, we're surrounded by stories, films, TV shows, music, books, social media that show us what leadership looks like. These stories don't just reflect reality, they shape it. They teach us who gets to lead, what leadership should look like, and what traits make someone strong, inspiring, or heroic. Over time, these cultural messages sink in. And what do they often show us? Leadership is most commonly portrayed through a narrow lens, typically as white, male, able-bodied, and heterosexual. That repeated image creates an unconscious standard. So when we picture a leader, we're often drawing from cultural scripts, not lived experience or evidence. And this matters a lot, because these portrayals limit who we see as capable of leading. They influence our expectations of others and of ourselves. They help shape the unconscious biases that show up in hiring decisions, media coverage, politics, and even classroom discussions. But pop culture doesn't just reinforce ideas, it also has the power to challenge them. It offers us aspirational leaders, cautionary tales, and even satirical critiques of power. It gives us room to reflect on leadership without directly confronting institutions. And it helps us engage with complex ideas like power, ethics, identity, and crisis in ways that feel familiar and accessible. So when we talk about how our perspectives on leadership are formed, we have to ask, what stories have shaped my view? Who have I seen lead, and who have I not? Whose voice is missing? Because leadership isn't just taught, it's absorbed. And popular culture is one of the biggest teachers we have. When we think about leadership, we often look to speeches, policies, or behaviours. But what about images? What about visual art? Visual art has always had the power to disrupt the norm. It draws attention to things we often overlook: power structures, inequalities, ideologies. In many ways, art leads through disruption. It challenges dominant stories. It exposes what lies beneath the surface. And most importantly, it invites us to rethink power and leadership. Historically, art hasn't just reflected leadership, it's helped construct and contest it. As John Berger pointed out back in 1972, art shapes what we see as leadership. It's not just a mirror, it's a tool for redefining the story. And this isn't just theory. Visuals shape public consciousness. According to W.J.T. Mitchell, 2005, images play a huge role in how people perceive leadership and power. Think of iconic photographs, political posters, or viral images online. They leave lasting impressions and they influence how we understand authority. Power, in fact, is often aestheticized, made to look a certain way. As thinkers like Debord, 1967, and Foucault, 1977, have shown, images aren't neutral. They become tools of legitimation, making certain leaders, systems, or ideas appear natural, inevitable, or even heroic. So what does this mean? It means that visual art isn't just decoration, it's a dynamic force. It can construct, challenge, or reinforce leadership. It influences how we see leadership, literally. And understanding this helps us decode how power is communicated in our society. So next time you see a painting, a photograph, a political campaign image, or even a meme, ask yourself, what kind of leadership is being shown here? Whose power is being legitimized or questioned? Because in the world of leadership, what we see often shapes what we believe. When we talk about leadership, music might not be the first thing that comes to mind. But maybe it should be, because music isn't just entertainment, it's a powerful social force. It shapes how we feel, how we think, and how we move together. Tia Dinora in 2000 explained that music has emotional power that helps shape collective identity and shared feeling, and those are both essential to leadership. Think about it, a song that unifies a crowd, a track that fuels a protest, a melody that captures the emotional heart of a movement. In these moments, music leads us emotionally. It guides how we feel and often how we act. Take Kendrick Lamar's All Right, for example. It became a kind of unofficial anthem for the Black Lives Matter movement, not just because of the lyrics, but because of the feeling, defiance, resilience, and hope in the face of oppression. That's emotional leadership in action. But music doesn't only unite, it also disrupts. Scholars like Dick Hebdige and Trisha Rose remind us that genres like punk and hip-hop emerged as sonic rebellions. Punk shouted back at political apathy in the late 1970s. Bands like the Sex Pistols didn't just make noise, they challenged power. Early hip-hop gave voice to black consciousness and resistance. Public Enemy, for example, turned rhythm into revolution. In these cases, artists become more than performers, they become symbolic leaders, representing ideologies, communities, and struggles. Simon Frith puts it well. Musicians often embody values far beyond the stage. Look at Beyoncé's homecoming performance at Coachella. That wasn't just a concert, it was a statement, a curated celebration of Black excellence, HBCU culture, and feminist leadership. It told a story, it led a conversation. And that's the final point. Music tells leadership stories. As Connell and Gibson argue, music helps construct narratives of resistance, survival, and transformation. Think of Johnny Cash singing to incarcerated men at Folsom and San Quentin, giving voice to the unheard. Or Tracy Chapman, whose Talking About a Revolution reframes struggle as something hopeful and collective. These aren't just songs, they're leadership in motion, emotionally, politically, and narratively. So, when we study leadership, we need to tune into more than strategy and theory, we need to listen. Because sometimes the most powerful leadership happens through music. Literature continues to be a powerful lens through which leadership is explored, challenged, and reimagined. In contemporary fiction, we often see leadership portrayed through feminist and resistant lenses. Collins, 2008. A striking example is Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games, a reluctant but compelling leader whose defiance against a totalitarian regime turns her into a symbol of revolutionary hope. Her leadership is grounded not in hierarchy or charisma, but in care, survival, and symbolic resistance. At the same time, literature frequently examines the corrupting influence of power. Shakespeare's Macbeth remains a foundational exploration of how ambition unchecked by moral limits can lead to authoritarianism and destruction. This trajectory, from noble soldier to tyrant, illustrates how power without accountability warps leadership into domination. Many texts still draw on archetypal leadership figures, heroes who lead through courage, foresight, and perseverance. Think of Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, who leads by moral example, standing up for justice in a deeply prejudiced society. Such characters reflect idealized, often transformational forms of leadership that inspire change in those around them. Contemporary literature also increasingly interrogates questions of identity in leadership, bringing issues of gender, race, and class to the forefront. These narratives ask not only what leadership is, but who gets to lead and whose voices are heard. For instance, Toni Morrison's works often explore the intersection of race and power, showing how leadership can emerge from trauma, memory, and community strength. Ultimately, literature offers not just reflection but imagination, a space where leadership can be critiqued, deconstructed, and redefined.